Hello, I'm Amy,
Hi, I'm Danny.
and we're PATH, which is Process Adjustment by Tackling Hangups, and this is our fall end of quarter update video. So to start, the problem that we're tackling is that struggling CS students are unsatisfied with the performance in CS classes and on assignments, but they don't know how to identify the ineffective actions in their process or reflect on the root causes for these actions, such as imposter syndrome, low self-efficacy, or low sense of belonging. And so, without adopting solutions that address both the ineffective actions and the root causes, they'll continue to struggle in computer science. So last quarter, we built a list of resources to help struggling CS students, which was based on interviews with practitioners such as Dean Haltgreave and Heather Bacon, who is the head of ASLA. And these resources can be seen on the right. However, the shortcoming with these existing approaches is that they only address the user's surface level ineffective behaviors, such as poor help seeking skills or procrastination. However, they fail to link a student's ineffective actions to their psychological root causes. For example, a student might struggle with help seeking because they have a low sense of belonging in computer science, which makes them afraid to reach out to a professor. And so, without addressing both the underlying negative psychological mindsets and the ineffective behaviors, students will continue with these ineffective learning strategies. And so PATH's conceptual approach is twofold. First, we want to create a model that connects a student's ineffective behaviors to their psychological root causes, and from there, provide resource suggestions that address both the root cause and the behavior. And to get students to listen to this model, we created a design that scaffolds the reflection into four parts. First, we get students to reflect on the granular actions they took while completing an assignment, and then identifying the ineffective actions in this process. From these ineffective actions, they identify the critical incident that led them to struggle with the rest of the assignment. After identifying this critical incident, they reflect on the action and identify the psychological hangups and root causes that led to this. And then from there, we provide them with resources that target both the root cause and the ineffective behavior. And so that leads us to our contributions for this quarter. So throughout the quarter, we did need finding and design iterations on our design. So we interviewed 4 CS professors to gain insight into what students commonly struggle with and what current approaches were used in the classroom. We wrote an undergraduate research grant to clarify the existing approaches in research and also thought through our research contributions. And then we conducted design probes with different iterations of our design with 15 struggling CS students. And so for our need finding, one method for our need finding was interviewing CS professors. So we interviewed 4 CS professors on why students commonly drop from their courses. And we found that part of the user problem was related to the psychological hangups and mindsets that students faced, in addition to difficulties learning the concepts. So, for example, one professor noted that there was a students had difficulty with the course if they had a fixed mindset. So if you agree with CS is a skill that you practice and get better at over time, you're more likely to stay in CS. And another professor highlighted the low sense of belonging that's prevalent in students that are new to CS. So for example, people with 10 years of CS experience think they have the most skill and know it all. And so these students want to show off, which can make other students in the intro level classes nervous. And as our next method to our need finding, we also conducted interviews with struggling CS 100 and 200 level students to see how far they could reflect on a assignment that they struggled with without a design tool. And so the core obstacles that we found were that these reflections often only focused on difficulties learning the material and not the psychological root causes. So when they were asked why an assignment went poorly, a lot of the things that they said were just related to difficulties with paying attention in class, not knowing how to fix the errors, or having difficulty learning the terminology. And these reflections weren't looking at the root causes, such as the root causes that might have led to these difficulties.
Our first elicitation tool was had the goal of eliciting a response about a recent CS struggle that connects ineffective behaviors to root causes. Our obstacle being addressed was to try to fully automate the reflection process for a user on a recent CS struggle with zero intervention from the researchers. So some of our results from our first iteration is that we assumed that the users knew what ineffective behaviors and root causes were. We did not explicitly define these terms, and so the users had trouble providing the correct ideal responses. There was also a lack of user fit. And so upon recognizing these limitations of the design, we created a second iteration of the post-it design, wherein rather than asking explicitly for ineffective behaviors and root causes, we inputted questions that implicitly elicit ineffective behaviors and root causes. And some of the findings that we have identified was that there was no connection between multivarious ineffective behaviors. Students usually only listed one ineffective behavior. Um, which indicates that there was not enough scaffolding, or perhaps the scaffolding itself was incorrect, which did not lead to a granular understanding of the details in ACS struggle. We also believed that the post-it notes created an interface barrier that prevented the user from eliciting a variety of thoughts and experiences because users did not usually create more post-it notes than what was already provided in the given template. Our second elicitation tool utilized a reflection document, and the goal was to allow the user to generate a timeline of concrete events when they were working on a CS assignment. This would help them identify specific and various ineffective behaviors while reducing the interface barrier for reflection. And some of these obstacles being addressed was helping the user to understand the precise scope of the assignment, to increase the number of ineffective behaviors that are being elicited, and also address interface barriers from our first elicitation tool. And we ask the questions about what was a time you recently struggled with an assignment and what was the assignment. And we also ask what day the assignment was due and when they first began working on the assignment. And part two is when they reflect on their process, wherein we help them generate a timeline for how the user worked on the assignment, and within each day in which they started working on the assignment, to ask them to generate detailed events throughout the timeline as the deadline approaches. And then part three is where we ask them to reflect on ineffective behaviors. The goal of this section is to help them understand why a behavior was ineffective by asking about the desired outcome. And part four is where we help them identify common psychological hangups. So we ask them to check certain psychological hangups that we have accumulated from prior research, and ask how that related to their timeline throughout the assignment. And then part five is where we brainstorm and discuss solutions. So we ask the user to isolate specific ineffective behaviors and um, provide resource suggestions. So some of the successes of this tool were we successfully allowed users to identify multiple ineffective behaviors. And we also were able to elicit a deeper reflection on the root cause that links the psychological hangup to their direct impact on the user's work in a specific CS assignment. We also generated a timeline with multiple events in which decisions were made. Um, However, some of our failures include being unable to teach the user how to fully connect why behaviors were ineffective. More specifically, the users were unable to understand how each specific behavior could have been improved, and instead attribute the behaviors to a holistic problem of a study habit. So, for example, procrastination is what they believe is the problem or the root cause, but not the actual decisions being made on the assignment. Um, and there was also a lack of granularity on the behaviors and decisions during each point while the student was working on the assignment, and the timeline also does not begin when the assignment is actually first assigned. Our third elicitation tool produced more granularity, and that was our goal. And we also aimed to bridge the connection between a behavior and its ineffectiveness. Our obstacles aimed to address were the correct or to create a correct timeline in which the user journey begins when the CS assignment is first assigned and ends when the deadline approaches or when the user completes the assignment, and to have greater granularity and also correct reflection on each behavior. Um, Part one is when we is quite similar to previously, except we ask when the assignment was first assigned or posted. And part two is when we create specific dates and ask what the user did on each day, and ask if there was anything ineffective with the behaviors that they did on that day. And part three is where we reflect on their ineffective behaviors, and we ask the user to highlight an action in their previous process reflection that they felt was the main incident that caused them to struggle with the rest of the assignment. And we also ask them to reflect on alternative actions that they could have tried and obstacles that came in the way of implementing these alternative actions. So some results from this elicitation tool was, while some students were able to reflect linearly from ineffective behavior to psychological hangup, others weren't. Um, all students did go into detail about actions they took during a critical incident, and as evidence of that, we saw that the number of elicited behaviors increased from our previous elicitation tools, and the amount of detail also increased too. Um, and finally, the elicitation tool successfully helped students go deeper into why they were behaving ineffectively. So, for instance, an example is I went to office hours back to back. I could have gotten more time and rewritten it and thought more deeply about advice from the first PM. And the reason I did this is because of low self-efficacy, and I felt scared I couldn't do it without going to office hours. So yeah, and so our lessons from this quarter overall is that we were able to successfully prototype a self-guided tool that effectively helps users identify ineffective behaviors with a deeper reflection on root causes. We did not assign any psychological hangups to the users, and they were able to have full autonomy over this journey. We also learned that struggling CS students want to recognize all their actions that they could have potentially taken at each point they struggled in CS, but they cannot because it requires an understanding of the relationship between ineffective behaviors, root causes, and existing obstacles. And our design is meant to break down this reflection process into easy steps, wherein each step allows the user to recognize connections between the three aspects. So some of our next steps include scaffolding more of the process between each part in the elicitation tool, wherein we include questions for users to verify the alignment between ineffective behaviors, root causes, and potential obstacles. We also hope to generate a database of resources for assisting students with psychological hangups that is more comprehensive and and tailored to the specific experiences of each class. We also want to automate that process of selecting which resource is best fit for a student within the baked database during the post-reflection process. And also we hope to optimize the interface for the elicitation tool. So final takeaways are that we can create a fully automated and scalable tool to guide students through a reflection process, targeting ineffective behaviors while eliciting deeper root causes. And this might actually be better than simply talking to a student in person because it creates more granularity. And we can also reduce the CS department's reliance on counseling and funding and additional resources to support the development of early learners in CS by using a scalable tool.